"You can't marry our daughter," they said. But the dragon princess had already claimed the human. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. The throne room of the Draken's empire stretched before Nathan Brooks like a cathedral of living flame, its walls pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that shifted between crimson and gold. He stood there in his simple mechanic's coveralls, grease still visible under his fingernails, facing beings who could incinerate him with a single breath, and all he could think about was how her hand had felt in his 3 nights ago when she'd whispered those 3 words that changed everything. The Emperor Varus towered before Nathan, his scales the deep obsidian of volcanic glass, each one reflecting the amber light that cascaded from the crystalline ceiling high above. His eyes burned like molten copper, fixed on the human with an intensity that made the air itself shimmer with heat. Beside him stood Empress Solara, her scales a deep sapphire blue that seemed to hold entire galaxies within their depths. Her presence somehow both terrifying and mesmerizing. Between them, her head held high despite the obvious tension, stood Princess Seraphina, and Nathan's breath caught in his throat just as it had the first time he'd seen her 6 months ago. Seraphina's scales were unlike any other dragon Nathan had encountered in his 2 years working at the imperial shipyards, where most dragons bore the heavy armored plating of their warrior heritage. Hers seemed to flow like liquid mercury, touched with rose gold. They caught the light in impossible ways, creating patterns that reminded Nathan of sunset, clouds, and distant nebula. Her eyes, currently locked with his across the vast expanse of polished obsidian floor, held that same fierce determination he'd fallen in love with, mixed now with something that looked dangerously close to fear. Emperor Varus spoke, and his voice was like grinding tectonic plates, each word carrying the weight of millennia of unbroken tradition. "Your petition has been heard, human Nathan Brooks. You stand before the oldest bloodline in the known galaxy and request the hand of our daughter, the crown princess of the Drakon's empire, heir to a throne that predates your species' discovery of fire. By what right do you make such a claim? By what measure of worth do you believe yourself suitable for one whose lineage can be traced back 40,000 generations?" Nathan had prepared for this moment. He'd spent 3 sleepless nights rehearsing what he would say, how he would appeal to ancient customs and demonstrate his value. He'd studied Draken's history until his eyes burned, learned their formal greeting rituals until his muscles ached from the precise movements required. But standing there with Seraphina's parents radiating disapproval like twin suns, all those careful preparations evaporated. "With all due respect, your imperial majesties," Nathan began, his voice steady despite the hammering of his heart, "I don't claim any right based on lineage or wealth or ancient bloodlines. I love your daughter, she loves me, and where I come from, that's what matters." The temperature in the throne room dropped so suddenly that frost crystallized on Nathan's breath. Empress Solara leaned forward, her scales rippling with suppressed emotion. "Love," she said, and the word carried such weight that Nathan felt it like a physical pressure against his chest. "You speak of love as though it were something simple, something that overcomes all obstacles through mere sentiment. You are a mechanic, human, a Skilled one, we are told, but a mechanic. Nonetheless, you work with your hands in grease and metal. Our daughter is destined to rule billions, to command fleets that span entire star systems, to make decisions that will echo through the centuries. I know what she's destined for, Nathan replied quietly. I've watched her study until dawn, seen her immediate disputes between colony worlds with wisdom that puts career diplomats to shame, witnessed her make the hard calls that save lives at personal cost. I know exactly who she is, Your Majesty. That's precisely why. Love her. Serafina made a small sound, barely audible, but Nathan heard it. He knew every sound she made. From her laugh that reminded him of wind chimes, to the soft rumble she made when she was deep in thought, Emperor Vicaris rose from his throne, and the movement was like watching a mountain decide to relocate. He descended the steps with deliberate slowness, each footfall making the floor vibrate. When he reached Nathan, he towered over the human by at least 4 meters, his presence overwhelming. Steam rose from his nostrils as he examined Nathan with those burning eyes. You are aware, the Emperor said, his voice dropping to something that was almost conversational, but somehow even more intimidating, that no human has ever been bound in permanent union to a member of the imperial family. You understand that such a precedent would send shock waves through every level of our society. The other noble houses already question our decision to allow humans such unprecedented access to our worlds, our technology, our culture. This union you propose would be seen by many as the ultimate degradation of our ancient ways. Nathan held the Emperor's gaze, though every instinct screamed at him to look away. Then maybe it's time. Your ancient ways evolved, Your Majesty. With respect, the universe has changed since those traditions were established. Humans and Dracones work together now. We've built entire colonies in partnership, fought side by side against the Void Raiders, shared our different strengths to create something neither species could achieve alone. How long are you going to pretend that keeping the bloodlines pure matters more than what two people mean to each other? The silence that followed was absolute. Even the ambient hum of the palace's systems seemed to hold its breath. Serafina closed her eyes, whether in pride or horror Nathan couldn't tell. The Emperor's scales began to glow, heat radiating from him in waves that made the air ripple and dance. You dare, Emperor Viraris growled, to lecture me on the evolution of tradition, you who have walked this galaxy for barely cosmic heartbeat, presume to tell me what matters? I presume nothing, Nathan said, and now his own anger was rising, burning away the fear. I'm not asking you to change your whole society. I'm asking you to let your daughter choose her own happiness. She didn't ask for this any more than I planned it, but it happened, and it's real, and it's worth fighting for. Father Serafina's voice cut through the tension like a blade of crystal. Please let me speak. The Emperor turned, his expression unreadable. You have remained silent throughout this proceeding, daughter. We wondered when you would find your voice. Serafina moved forward, her movements carrying that particular grace that Nathan had first noticed when she'd entered his workshop 6 months ago, her personal shuttle suffering from what she'd apologetically described as an unfortunate malfunction. She'd watched him work for 3 hours, asking questions that revealed a deep understanding of propulsion systems, and when he'd finally gotten the drive core purring. Again, she'd smiled at him in a way that made his carefully maintained professional distance evaporate like morning dew. I remained silent. Serafina said, because I wanted you to hear Nathan without my influence. Coloring your perception, I wanted you to see what I see when I look at him. Not a human mechanic from a young species, but a person of integrity, intelligence and courage, a person who sees me truly sees me not as a princess, or a political asset or a symbol of ancient glory, but as Serafina. She moved to stand beside Nathan, and though she didn't touch him, he felt the warmth of her presence like a physical force. When I asked Nathan to petition for formal courtship rights, I knew what I was asking of him. I knew he would face the scrutiny of the entire noble court. I knew the other houses would see it as scandal, that the conservative factions would call it degeneracy, that some would even claim I was somehow compromised or enchanted. I asked him anyway because I love him, and because I believe that what we have is worth any price. Empress Solara spoke, her voice softer now, but no less intense. Serafina, my daughter, my precious flame, you are young, a mere 230 cycles. You have not yet seen how the universe can change, how passion can fade when faced with the grinding reality of centuries. This human, this Nathan, he will age and die while you are still in what we consider young adulthood. Have you truly considered what that means? Nathan felt his stomach twist. This was the argument he dreaded most, the one truth he couldn't argue against. He was 28 standard years old. In the best case, with modern medicine, he might live to see 120, maybe 140 if he was exceptionally lucky. Serafina would live for thousands of years. Their time together would be for her barely a heartbeat. I have considered it, mother, Serafina said quietly. I have thought of little else. Every moment I spend with Nathan is precious because I know our time is limited, and yes, it will hurt. It will hurt more than anything I can imagine when time takes him from me. But I would rather have 50 years of true companionship than 5,000 years of suitable but empty union. The Empress's scales flickered, patterns of emotion rippling across them in ways Nathan had learned to read. She was wavering. He realized the iron certainty he'd seen when he first entered was cracking. Emperor Vicaris, however, remained unmoved. Beautiful sentiment, he said, worthy of the poets and dreamers, but you speak of 50 years as though it were guaranteed. Have you forgotten that humans are fragile? Their bodies break easily, they sicken, they are vulnerable to threats that would barely inconvenience one of our kind. What happens when some accident befalls him? What happens when you must watch him suffer from age and infirmity while you remain unchanged? What happens when he is gone and you must continue for millennia with only memories? Then I will have those memories, Serafina said, and her voice held such absolute conviction that even the Emperor seemed taken back. I will have known what it means to be truly chosen, not for political advantage or bloodline compatibility or strategic alliance, but simply for who I am. Can you honestly say that every moment of your 5,000 years has been more valuable than that? The Emperor's scales rippled, and for just a moment Nathan saw something flicker in those ancient eyes, paint, perhaps, or recognition. The massive dragon turned away, looking up at the vast crystal dome above them through which the twin moons of Draeon's prime were just becoming visible in the darkening sky. You speak words that echo uncomfortably with my own past. Daughter, Emperor Vicaris said softly. You may not remember, you were barely hatched, but your mother and I did not begin our union as a matter of state convenience. She was of a noble house. Yes, but not the match my parents wished. For me, they wanted an alliance with the fire clans of the eastern reaches. I wanted Solara. We fought for 3 cycles to gain their acceptance. Empress Solara moved to stand beside her mate, and Nathan saw her place one elegant claw on his arm, a gesture of such simple affection that it seemed to transform them from imposing imperial figures into something more recognizable, more fundamentally real. We remember the pain of being told our feelings were unsuitable, the Empress said. We remember being informed that passion was insufficient grounds for permanent union. But Veraris, my love, this situation is different. We were both Dracones. We were both of compatible age and lifespan. We faced social obstacles, yes, but not biological impossibilities. Are they impossible, though? Nathan spoke up, and 3 pairs of eyes turned to him. He pressed forward, the idea crystallizing. Even as he spoke, you're right that humans are fragile compared to Dracones. Our lifespans are short, our bodies vulnerable, but that's been changing. In the past 50 years, human medical science has made advances that would have seemed like magic to our grandparents. We're learning genetic modification, cellular regeneration, consciousness preservation, not to achieve immortality maybe, but to extend our healthy years, to make what time we have richer and fuller. You speak of theoretical advances, the Emperor said dismissively. I speak of active research being conducted right now. Nathan countered. There's a team on Kepler station working on cross-species medical applications. They've already successfully extended human lifespans by 30% using techniques adapted from Dracon's regenerative biology. It's not perfect yet, and it won't make me live as long as Seraphina, but it might give us a century together instead of 50 years, and the research continues. Who knows what will be possible in 10 years or 20? So your argument is that you might possibly theoretically live long enough to make this less tragic. The Emperor's tone was skeptical, but Nathan detected a thread of something else beneath it. Curiosity, perhaps. My argument is that the universe is full of unknowns. Nathan said, maybe I'll 50 years. Maybe I'll live 150. Maybe that research will lead to breakthroughs neither of us can imagine, or maybe something entirely unexpected will happen, but refusing to take a chance on something real because the future is uncertain seems like the worst kind of cowardice, and I've seen enough of the galaxy to know that every species, including yours, got where they are by people willing to take chances on things that seemed impossible. The Emperor studied Nathan for a long moment, and the human got the distinct impression he was being evaluated in ways he couldn't fully understand. Finally, Volcaris turned to his daughter. You are absolutely certain of this path? He asked. You understand that even if we give our blessing, there will be opposition. The other houses will not be silent. There will be those who see this as an insult to everything they hold sacred. Your life will become more complicated, more scrutinized, more dangerous perhaps than it already is. I understand, Father, Seraphina said. And I'm certain, the Emperor exchanged a long look with his mate, some wordless communication passing between them. Then he sighed, a sound like a volcano releasing pressure, and Nathan realized with shock that the ancient dragon suddenly looked tired. Very well, Emperor Varus said, we will not stand in your way, but neither can we simply grant our blessing without condition. You wish to prove yourself worthy of our daughter human Nathan Brooks, then you will undergo the trial of proving. Nathan felt his blood go cold. He'd read about the trial of proving during his research. It was an ancient draconian custom designed to test the worthiness of those who sought to join noble bloodlines. The specific trials varied, tailored to test the particular weaknesses of the supplicant, and historically, the failure rate for those attempting to join the imperial family was approximately 90%. Father, no, Seraphina protested. The trial of proving is archaic, it's barbaric, it was never meant for situations like this. On the contrary, the Emperor said, his voice regaining its formal weight, the trial exists precisely for situations like this, where an unconventional match requires demonstration of exceptional qualities. If Nathan truly possesses the strength of character you claim, if his spirit is as resilient as his words suggest, then he will succeed, and if he fails, well, that will answer the question of his suitability more definitively than any argument. Nathan looked at Seraphina, saw the fear and anger wearing in her expression, but beneath it he also saw trust. She believed he could do this. More importantly, she believed in him, in who he was, and that made the choice simple. I accept, Nathan said firmly. Whatever the trial requires, I'll face it. You don't even know what it will entail, the Empress said, and there was something like concern in her voice now. Doesn't matter, Nathan replied. I came here to prove I'm worthy of your daughter's love. If facing a trial is what it takes, then that's what I'll do. The Emperor's expression was unreadable, but Nathan thought he detected the faintest hint of approval in those burning eyes. So be it. The trial of proving will commence in 3 days' time. You will be given access to our historical archives to prepare, though I suspect much of what you face will require qualities that cannot be learned from books. We will reconvene here at dawn on the 3rd day. He raised one massive claw, and the air shimmered as a holographic display materialized before them. But understand this, human, the trial is not simply a formality. It is a genuine test, and it may require you to risk the very life you hope to share with our daughter. If you have doubts, now is the moment to voice them. Nathan looked up at the towering figure of the Emperor, then at the Empress with her galaxy-deep eyes, and finally at Seraphina, who watched him with such intensity that he felt it like a physical touch. No doubts, he said quietly. Not about this. The Emperor nodded slowly. Then you are dismissed. Use these 3 days wisely. As Nathan turned to leave, Seraphina moved to follow him, but her father's voice stopped her. You will remain. Daughter, there are matters we must discuss regarding the trial and what comes after, regardless of outcome. Nathan caught Seraphina's eye one last time before the massive doors of the throne room began to close. She mouthed 3 words that he'd heard her say only a handful of times, each one precious beyond measure. I love you. He mouthed them back, committing the image of her to memory as though he might never see her again. The doors closed with a sound, like destiny's sealing, and Nathan found himself in the vast corridors of the imperial palace, alone with his thoughts, and a crushing weight of what he'd just agreed to. A voice spoke from the shadows, making him jump. That was either the bravest or the most foolish thing I've witnessed in 3 centuries. Nathan spun to find a Dracones emerging from an alcove he hadn't noticed. This dragon was smaller than the Emperor, but still impressive, his scales a deep emerald green that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. He wore the insignia of the Imperial Guard on a baldry across his chest. Captain Thern, Nathan said, recognizing the dragon who served as head of palace security. He and Nathan had developed a cordial relationship during his months of visiting Seraphina. I'm going with Brave, if you don't mind. Thern's expression, insofar as Nathan had learned to read Draon's expression, seemed amused. I was present for the entire audience. Though you likely didn't notice me, it's my job to be unnoticed. I must say you handled the Emperor better than most nobles would have. He respects directness even when it borders on insolence. Is that a compliment or a warning? Nathan asked as they began walking down the corridor. Both. They said, come, I'll escort you to the archives. The Emperor granted you access, and I suspect you'll want to begin preparing immediately. As they walked, Nathan's mind was already racing ahead to what the trial might entail. What can you tell me about it? About what I should expect? There was silent for a moment, his claws clicking on the polished stone floor. The trial of proving is tailored to the individual. He finally said, it will test your weaknesses, yes, but also challenge your strengths. It's designed to reveal who you truly are under pressure. The details vary, but I can tell you this. It will almost certainly involve 3 components: a test of physical capability to see if your body can endure what life among us demands; test of mental acuity to see if your mind can navigate our complexities; in a test of character to see if your spirit is truly compatible with our princess. That's remarkably unhelpful, Nathan said, but without rancor. It's intentionally so, Thern replied. The trial loses its value if you know exactly what to expect, but I will offer you this advice: don't try to be Draconese. You'll fail. The point isn't to prove you can match us in our strengths, but to demonstrate that your different strengths have value. They reached a massive door carved with intricate scenes of Dracon's history, battles and treaties, and great moments of cultural achievement rendered in such detail that Nathan could have studied it for hours. The placed his claw on a biocanner, and the door swung open to reveal a chamber that made Nathan's breath catch. The Imperial Archives stretched before him like something from a dream. Crystalline data storage units rose in spiraling towers that disappeared into shadow far above. Holographic displays floated through the air like luminescent jellyfish, each one containing centuries of accumulated knowledge. The air itself seemed to hum with information, with the weight of 40,000 generations of recorded history. You have 3 days, Thern said. The terminals will respond to your voice commands, and you have unrestricted access to historical records of previous trials. I suggest you focus on those involving Nandra's supplicants, though there are few of those there, Nathan said as the captain turned to leave. Why are you helping me? You serve the Emperor. You're part of the establishment. I'm essentially challenging. The Emerald Dragon paused. Looking back over his shoulder, I serve the imperial family, he corrected. Gently, that includes the princess, and I've been watching her for the past 6 months, seeing how she lights up when you're near, how she laughs more freely, how she's grown more confident in her own judgment. My duty is to her well-being, and you make her happy, so yes, I'm helping you within the bounds of my duty and honor. I'm helping you. He left then, the doors closing behind him, and Nathan was alone in an ocean of alien knowledge with 3 days to prepare for a trial that might kill him. He didn't waste time being overwhelmed. That was a luxury he couldn't afford. Instead, Nathan moved to the nearest terminal and spoke clearly. Show me records of previous trials of proving, specifically those involving supplicants attempting to join the imperial family. The terminal chimed in holographic. Displays began to populate the space around him. He saw immediately that they had been right. There were very few non-Draeon supplicants in the records. Most were other noble Dracons seeking to elevate their status through marriage. He watched recording after recording of dragons proving their worthiness through displays of strength, strategic thinking, and occasionally artistic or scholarly achievement. But there were a handful of others, crystalline being from Andromeda Prime, who had attempted to court an imperial prince 3,000 years ago. The trial had involved navigating a maze while maintaining absolute concentration. Despite increasingly intense psychic interference, the crystalline being had succeeded, though the marriage itself had only lasted a century before. Philosophical differences led to an amicable separation. A methane-breathing entity from the Cold Belt colonies attempting to join the family 1,500 years ago. That trial had involved solving an impossible diplomatic crisis, mediating between 3 warring factions with incompatible needs. The entity had failed, unable to find the creative solution required, and one human only. One, and it had been nearly 200 years ago before formal human Dracons relations had even been established. A human explorer named Victoria Lane, who had, according to the records, saved the life of a young imperial cousin during a scientific expedition to a hostile world. The cousin had fallen in love, and Victoria had agreed to face the trial. Nathan's heart pounded as he called up the details. Victoria's trial had been brutal. She'd been required to survive alone on a hostile moon for 30 days with minimal equipment, demonstrating both physical resilience and mental fortitude. Then she'd faced a complex strategic simulation, commanding a fleet against overwhelming odds. Finally, she'd undergone something called the clarification, where she'd been required to defend her worthiness before a council of elder dragons while under the influence of a drug that made lying impossible. She had failed the strategic simulation, unable to think in the 3-dimensional spatial terms that came naturally to flying Dracones. The marriage had been denied. Victoria had left the Empire, and Nathan could find no further record of what had become of her. He sat back, processing what he'd learned. The trials were tailored to expose weakness, but they were also designed to be barely passable. They existed on the knife edge between challenging and impossible, and the fact that he was human with different strengths and weaknesses than Draeon meant his trial would almost certainly exploit those differences. Nathan spent The first day reviewing every trial he could find, looking for patterns, for commonalities, for insights into the Draken's mindset that designed these tests. He ate occasionally when his body reminded him and drank water brought by silent palace servants who appeared and vanished like ghosts. He didn't sleep that first night, too wired on adrenaline and determination. The second day he shifted focus to studying Draen's philosophy and values. If he was going to prove himself worthy of Seraphina, he needed to understand what worthiness meant in their cultural context. He dove deep into texts on honor, duty, and the concept they called Karthos, which roughly translated to soulfire, the essential quality that made a being truly alive and valuable. According to Draken's philosophy, Kathos couldn't be measured by simple metrics like strength or intelligence. It was the sum total of a being's capacity for growth, for resilience, for contributing something meaningful to the universe. Every being possessed Kathos, but it could be nurtured or neglected, grown or diminished. The trial of proving was designed to reveal the true state of a supplicant's kuros. Nathan found that concept strangely comforting. It meant he wasn't being tested simply on whether he could match Draken's capabilities, but on whether his essential self, his soul fire, burned bright enough and true enough to complement Seraphina's. On the second night, he finally allowed himself to sleep, curling up in a corner of the archives, wrapped in a thermal blanket provided by those silent servants. He dreamed of Seraphina, of the first time she'd kissed him 3 months into their relationship, transforming from her massive natural form into the smaller humanoid shape some Dracones could assume. He'd been terrified he would do something wrong, handle her too roughly or too tentatively, but she'd laughed at his nervousness and told him to stop overthinking, just be yourself. Nathan, she'd said, that's all I've ever wanted. He woke on the third day with those words echoing in his mind. That's all I've ever wanted. Be yourself, don't try to be Draconius. Advice aligned as though the universe was trying to tell him something. Nathan spent the final day not studying trials or philosophy, but reviewing his own life. He thought about growing up on Earth in the sprawling archaeology of New Chicago, the son of 2 factory workers who'd been delighted when their son showed an aptitude for engineering. He thought about his training, the long nights learning to feel what was wrong with a machine just by listening to it. He thought about joining the colonial shipwright program, about the first time he'd seen a real draconian vessel and been awed by the elegant fusion of art and function. He thought about every challenge he'd ever faced, every problem he'd solved, not through superior strength or ancient wisdom, but through sheer stubborn refusal to accept that something couldn't be fixed. That was his strength. He realized not power or longevity or tradition, but adaptability, the human gift for looking at something broken and figuring out how to make it work. When the dawn of the third day arrived, Nathan felt as ready as he could be. He'd showered and changed into clean clothes, the most formal outfit he owned, which still felt inadequate for an imperial trial. He made his way back to the throne room, where servants directed him to a different chamber, one he hadn't seen before. This room was smaller but no less impressive, its walls lined with what appeared to be viewing screens, currently displaying abstract patterns. Emperor Vicaris and Empress Solara were already present, along with Seraphina and a collection of other dragons Nathan didn't recognize, presumably nobles and officials whose presence was required. For an official trial, Seraphina's eyes met his across the chamber, and Nathan saw such a mixture of emotions there that it made his chest ache, fear for him, pride in him, love that needed no words. He gave her the smallest nod, a promise that he would do everything in his power to succeed. Human Nathan Brooks, Emperor Viraris intoned. Formally, you stand ready to face the trial of proving you seek the right to formally court Princess Seraphina to the throne of the Dracon's empire, and have accepted that you must demonstrate your worthiness through ordeal. Do you continue to consent freely to this trial? I do, Nathan said, his voice steady. Then let it be known that the trial shall consist of 3 challenges, as is traditional. The Emperor gestured, and the abstract patterns on the walls resolved into clear images. You will face the challenge of endurance to test your physical capacity. You will face the challenge of wisdom to test your mental acuity, and you will face the challenge of heart to test the truth of your character. Success in all 3 is required. Failure in any will result denial of your petition. Nathan nodded. He'd expected nothing less. The first challenge begins immediately, the Emperor said, and one wall of the chamber simply vanished, revealing a passageway beyond. You will enter the crucible of ascending flames. It is a course designed to test the limits of physical capability. For a draconian, fire is life. It sustains and strengthens us. For you it is deadly. You must traverse the crucible from beginning to end within 1 hour, retrieving the token of completion from the far side. You may use any tools or equipment you find within, but you may not receive aid from any other being. Nathan felt his mouth go dry. He'd expected a physical challenge, but somehow the reality of it was more intimidating than his imagination had prepared for. The chamber you will enter, the Empress added, her voice gentler than her mate's, contains temperatures that would be merely warm for our kind, but will be at the edge of human tolerance. The path is not simple. You will be required to climb, to balance, to navigate obstacles while your body struggles with heat, exhaustion. We have installed safety measures that will extract you if your vital signs reach critical levels, but such extraction will constitute failure. Nathan looked at Seraphina one more time. She looked terrified, and he realized this might be even harder for her than for him. She had to watch helpless while he faced danger. I'm ready, Nathan said. Then begin, the Emperor commanded. Nathan walked through the opening, and immediately the heat slammed into him like a physical force. The air shimmered and danced, making everything seem unreal. The passageway opened into a vast chamber, and Nathan's heart sank as he saw what lay before him. The crucible was a nightmare of an obstacle course, narrow beams suspended over pits that glowed with actual lava, climbing walls that radiated heat so intense Nathan could feel it from 20 m away, swinging platforms, rope bridges, sections that required crawling through spaces barely large enough to accommodate a human body, and everywhere the fire and heat that was sustenance to Draconian, but potential death to him. A timer appeared in holographic display at the entrance. 60 minutes. Nathan took a breath, the air searing his lungs, and started moving. The first section was a balance beam, narrow and slick with some coating that made it nearly frictionless. Below, molten rock bubbled and popped. Nathan's instinct screamed at him to go slowly, carefully, but he knew he couldn't afford that luxury. Time was as much an enemy as the heat. He ran across the beam, arms outstretched, letting his body's natural balance compensate for the unstable surface. He made it across with only a heart-stopping moment in the middle where one foot slipped and he had to throw himself forward in a controlled fall, landing hard on the platform on the far side. Pain shot through his knee, but he couldn't afford to acknowledge it. Already sweat was pouring down his face, his coveralls growing damp and clingy. The next obstacle was a climbing wall with handholds that glowed red hot. Nathan spotted a rack of tools mounted to one side and ran to it. Finding heat-resistant gloves and boots, he yanked them on, blessing whoever had placed them there, and attacked the wall. Climbing while overheating was an exercise in controlled desperation. Every movement felt like it cost twice the energy it should. His muscles screamed protest, his lungs burned with each breath of superheated air. But Nathan had spent years working in uncomfortable conditions in ships' engine rooms where the temperature could top 40 degrees in the thin atmospheres of barely terraformed worlds. He knew how to push through discomfort. The gloves helped but weren't perfect. He could still feel the heat through them, not enough to burn, but enough to make every handhold an exercise in willpower. He climbed methodically, testing each hold before committing his weight, keeping 3 points of contact at all times. Engineering principles applied just as well to rock climbing as to starship repair. He reached the top of the wall and found himself facing a rope bridge that swayed and bounced with every step. The ropes themselves seemed to be made of some heat-resistant material, but they'd been positioned to pass through columns of flame that shot up from below. At irregular intervals, Nathan watched the pattern of the flames for 30 seconds, timing them. There was a rhythm, complex but discernible. He waited for the gap, then moved, running across the bridge with desperate speed, feeling the heat of the flames as they erupted mere seconds after he passed each point. He made it to the far side, with his arm hairs singed and his heart hammering. The timer showed 35 minutes elapsed. He was halfway through his time, but he had no idea if he was halfway through the course. The next section made him pause despite his urgency. It was a tunnel barely large enough to crawl through, and it sloped downward toward what appeared to be a chamber of pure flame. There has to be a way through, Nathan thought. They wouldn't design a trial that's impossible, would they? He got down on his belly and started crawling, the heat now so intense that he could feel his skin starting to rein even through his clothes. The tunnel seemed to go on forever, and the smoke was starting to make him cough. Carbon monoxide poisoning, Nathan thought distantly. That'll get me before the heat does. Then he saw it, a side passage barely visible in the flickering light, branching off from the main tunnel. Nathan squeezed into it, contorting his body in ways that would have been impossible if he'd been any larger. The side passage rose instead of descended, and after what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, he emerged into another chamber. This one was different, cooler though still hot by human standards, and there on a pedestal in the center was a crystalline token that pulsed with inner light, the token of completion. Nathan ran to it, grabbed it, and looked around for the exit. There another passageway, this one. Mercifully straight and clear, he ran. His body moving on autopilot now. Everything screaming for rest but his will refusing to allow it, he burst out of the crucible into the observation chamber. The token clutched in his hand and immediately collapsed to his knees. Cool air that felt like diving into a mountain stream, washed over him. Someone was spraying him with water. Someone else was pressing something cold against his neck. Voices spoke in urgent Draconese above him. He'd made it. Timer, he dimly noticed, showed 48 minutes, 12 minutes to spare. Impressive. Emperor Vikaras's voice cut through the fog in Nathan's head. You found the hidden passage. Many don't. They simply try to push through the main tunnel and fail. Nathan wanted to respond but couldn't seem to make his mouth work. He settled for holding up the token instead. Rest, the Empress said, and her voice held something that might have been approval. The next challenge will begin in 1 hour. You've earned a respite. Nathan spent that hour in something close to a medical bay, being treated for secondary burns on his hands and minor heat exhaustion. Dragon he didn't know, wearing the insignia of a physician, treated him with surprising gentleness while explaining that he'd come dangerously close to the extraction thresholds several times. You have a remarkable pain tolerance, the physician observed. Most beings would have given up long before the tunnel section. I reviewed your biological scans. You were approaching the limits of human endurance. Had to, Nathan managed to say. His throat felt raw from breathing superheated air. The physician made a sound that might have been a chuckle. Indeed, your determination is noted and will be reported to the Emperor. When the hour was up, Nathan felt marginally more human. The burns had been treated with regenerative gel that left his hands feeling tight but functional. He'd consumed what felt like gallons of water. An electrolyte solution. He was, if not ready, at least capable of facing the next challenge. He returned to the observation chamber to find the assembled nobles looking at him with expressions he couldn't quite read. Surprise, perhaps, or respect. Seraphina's face showed naked relief, and he gave her a small smile to let her know he was okay. The second challenge, Emperor Varus announced, is the challenge of wisdom. You will face a problem that has vexed our finest military minds. It is a tactical simulation designed to be solved only through insight and creative thinking. The walls of the chamber transformed. Again, this time showing a star map. Nathan studied it, seeing a cluster of systems, trade routes, and what were clearly marked as military positions. The scenario is thus, the Emperor explained. You command a small defensive fleet protecting a colony world, an enemy force vastly superior in numbers and firepower is approaching. Your reinforcements are 3 days away. Standard tactics suggest you should evacuate the colony and retreat, preserving your ships for future engagements. However, the colony contains critical infrastructure that took decades to build and houses research that could change the balance of power if it fell into enemy hands. You must either defend the indefensible or find an alternative that preserves both your forces and the colony's strategic value. Nathan felt his exhaustion trying to drag at his thoughts, but he pushed it aside. This was his element, not physical endurance, but problem solving. He'd spent his entire career finding solutions that Others said were impossible. He studied. The map really studied it, looking at terrain, orbital mechanics, the specific composition of both fleets, questions formed in his mind. Can I ask questions about the scenario? He said. You may. The emperor replied, though be aware that excessive questioning may indicate indecisiveness. Nathan ignored the veiled criticism. What's the tech level of the enemy? Do they have faster than light sensors, or are they limited to light speed detection? A brief pause. Limited to light speed detection. Known raider group, well equipped but not cutting edge. Nathan nodded. Something clicking into place. And the colony world, does it have any natural satellite large enough to mask ship signatures? Yes, the display showed large moon tidally locked with significant metallic content that could interfere with sensors. Okay, Nathan said, his mind now racing. Here's what I'd do. First, I wouldn't evacuate the full colony. I'd create the appearance of evacuation, making it loud and obvious while actually evacuating only non-essential personnel through covert means. The enemy is looking for a target worth the effort of attacking. If they think the colony is already abandoned, it becomes less strategically valuable to them. Clever misdirection, Empress Solaro observed, but ultimately delay, not solution. They will still arrive and discover the ruse. That's where the moon comes in. Nathan continued, warming to his plan. I'd position my fleet behind the moon, completely dark and silent. No power signatures, no emissions. The metallic content masks our presence. When the enemy fleet arrives and begins scanning what they believe is an abandoned or minimally defended colony, I'd use the colony's remaining automated defense systems not to fight but to create false signatures, make them think there's a larger force present than actually exists. Or better yet, make them believe the valuable research has already been moved. And then the emperor's tone was skeptical but engaged. Then I'd wait. Raiders are opportunistic. If they believe the prize isn't there and they're facing unknown opposition, their most likely response is to withdraw and seek easier targets. But if they commit to searching or engaging, that's when my ships move. We hit them from behind while they're focused on the colony, using the moon's gravity well to slingshot into attack position. We don't need to destroy them, just damage them enough that continuing the attack becomes more costly than withdrawing. There was a long silence in the chamber. Nathan watched the assembled nobles exchange looks he couldn't interpret. You would gamble everything on your reading of enemy psychology, the emperor finally said. No, Nathan replied. I'd gamble on understanding that raiders think like business people. They're not ideological enemies, they're resource extractors. Change the cost-benefit analysis and they'll change their behavior. And if I'm wrong, if they commit anyway, then I've still put my fleet in position for a surprise attack with tactical advantages they weren't expecting. It's not perfect, but it's better odds than a straight fight we definitely lose. The emperor looked at his mate, and Nathan saw something pass between them. Then Varus turned back to Nathan. In 300 years of using this simulation, you are the first non-Draconesian to propose that solution. Most attempt to fight cleverly or retreat strategically, but they think in terms of military outcomes. You thought in terms of psychology and economics. It is the emperor paused, and Nathan could have sworn he saw approval in those ancient Eyes, precisely the kind of innovative thinking that has made humanity such formidable allies and such concerning potential enemies. Does that mean I passed? Nathan asked. It means you demonstrated wisdom, the Empress said. Whether you have passed the trial in its entirety remains to be seen. There is still the third challenge. Nathan's moment of triumph faded. The challenge of heart, the test of character. In some ways he dreaded this more than the physical or mental challenges, those he could prepare for, could tackle with tangible skills. But how did you prove the contents of your soul? You will be given 1 hour to rest, the Emperor said. Then the final challenge will begin. This time Nathan was taken to an actual chamber, a room with a simple bed, where he could lie down. He didn't think he'd sleep. His mind was too active, but exhaustion claimed him almost immediately. He dreamed again of Seraphina, but this time the dream was strange and unsettling. She was calling to him across a vast distance, but every step he took toward her seemed to make her farther away. He woke disoriented and found Captain Therne standing in the doorway. It's time, the Emerald Dragon said quietly. Nathan followed him back to the observation chamber, which had transformed once more. This time it was simpler, more intimate. The assembled nobles were gone. Only the Emperor, the Empress, and Seraphina remained. The final challenge, Emperor Vicaris said, and his voice was softer now, almost gentle, is the simplest and the most difficult. The challenge of heart requires absolute honesty. You will be given a choice, and your answer will reveal the truth of who you are. He gestured, and a holographic display materialized before Nathan. It showed 2 paths like something from an ancient mythology tale. On your left, the Emperor said, we offer you what you have asked for, permission to formally court our daughter. We will give our blessing despite our reservations. You may pursue a relationship with Seraphina without impediment from us, but know this, you will face opposition from the other noble houses. There will be those who see you as an interloper, who will work to undermine you at every turn. Your presence in Seraphina's life will complicate her path to the throne, will make her reign more difficult. When it eventually comes, you will be a source of controversy and conflict for as long as you live. The display on the left showed scenes of Nathan and Seraphina together, but shadowed by arguing nobles, political maneuvering, public controversy. It was a future of love, but also struggle. On your right, Vararis continued, we offer you an alternative. We have been speaking with the humans of the Kepler Station research facility. They have agreed to accept you into their program, the one researching life extension and cross-species medical applications. You would become a test subject, a pioneer. The process is not guaranteed to succeed, and it carries risks, but if it works, you could extend your natural lifespan significantly, enough perhaps to be with Seraphina for centuries rather than decades. The display on the right showed Nathan in a laboratory surrounded by equipment and scientists, then emerging to reunite with Seraphina years later. Both of them unchanged, but there is a cost, the Empress said, taking over the explanation. The research requires years of dedication. You would need to leave immediately to commit yourself fully to the program for a minimum of 5 years. Possibly longer. You would not be able to maintain contact with Seraphina during that time. The procedures require Isolation, focus, freedom from emotional complications that could skew results. You would be choosing the possibility of a longer future together over the certainty of the present. Nathan felt his world tilt. This wasn't a test of character, this was an impossible choice: love now with all its complications, or sacrifice the present for a possible better future. This is the challenge of heart. The emperor said, do you choose your happiness in the moment, knowing it will be brief and difficult, or do you choose the harder path, the sacrifice of present joy for potential long-term benefit? There is no wrong answer, Nathan Brooks, only the answer that reveals your true priorities. Nathan looked at Serafina and saw that she was crying. Silent tears rolled down her face, shimmering with an inner light that he'd learned meant deep emotion for Drayan. She wasn't allowed to speak. He realized this decision had to be his alone. He thought about everything he'd been through in the past 3 days. The research, the pain, the problem solving. He thought about what he'd learned about Draconi's culture, about Koros, about the soul fire that defined a being's worth, and he knew his answer. This isn't actually a choice about Serafina at all, Nathan said quietly. It's about me. You're asking whether I'm the kind of person who sacrifices the present for an uncertain future, or the kind who grabs happiness while it's available. You're asking what I value most. The emperor's expression was unreadable. And what do you value most? I value honesty, Nathan said, and the honest truth is that 5 years of research might give me a longer life, but it won't make the time I have more meaningful. You told me this challenge would reveal my character. Well, my character is that I don't postpone living. I don't put off the important things for the convenient time. I've watched too many people do that. Wait for the right moment that never comes. Sacrifice the real for the theoretical. He turned to face the emperor and empress directly. I choose the left path. I choose to be with your daughter now, to face whatever controversies and difficulties that brings, because that's the only way to actually live. Not carefully, not calculated to maximize some theoretical outcome, but fully and presently and real. Yes, I'll have fewer years with her than I would if I'd been born Draconis. Yes, our relationship will make her life more complicated, but those years will be lived, not deferred. And those complications will be faced together, not avoided out of fear. Chamber was silent for a long moment. Then Serafina made a sound, something between a laugh and a sob, and Nathan realized she was smiling through her tears. Emperor Vicaris and Empress Solara looked at each other, and Nathan saw something extraordinary. The ancient dragons were also crying, tears that glowed like molten metal tracking down their scaled faces. There is no Kepler station program, the emperor said softly, not as we described it. Research is real, but we invented the specific offer. It was a fabrication, a test of your priorities. Nathan felt something twist in his chest. You mean I could have chosen years of isolation for nothing, for a program that doesn't even exist? You could have chosen an illusion of safety over the reality of love. The empress corrected. You could have decided that avoiding present difficulty was worth sacrificing present joy. Many do. They tell themselves they're being practical, but they're really being afraid. She moved forward, and for the first time since Nathan had met her, she transformed, shifting from her massive natural form to more humanoid shape. similar to what Seraphina could assume. She reached out and placed a scaled hand on his shoulder. My daughter chose. Well, she said, you are not Draconis. Nathan Brooks. You will never have our strength or our longevity or our ancient traditions, but you have something that many of us have forgotten in our thousands of years, the courage to embrace the fleeting moment, the wisdom to know that a short life lived fully burns brighter than a long life lived. Cautiously, you pass the challenge of endurance, not because you are strong, but because you refuse to quit, the Emperor added, also transforming and approaching. You pass the challenge of wisdom, not because you think like us, but because you think differently and see solutions we miss. And you passed the challenge of heart, not because you made the objectively correct choice. There was no objectively correct choice, but because you made the honest one. Then Nathan said, his voice barely working, I have your blessing. You have more than that, Very said. And now Nathan could see that beneath the ancient dignity, beneath the imperial gravitas, there was a father who loved his daughter. You have our respect. You have our acknowledgement that perhaps, just perhaps, these ancient traditions needed to encounter someone who didn't see them as insurmountable. The Emperor placed his hand on Nathan's other shoulder, and Nathan stood there, supported by two of the most powerful beings in the known galaxy, feeling more humbled than he'd felt in his entire life. Seraphina was suddenly there, having crossed the distance between them. In a blur of motion, she wrapped her arms around Nathan, and he held her as tightly as he dared, feeling her shake with emotion. I'm sorry, she whispered against his ear. I'm so sorry they put you through that. I didn't know about the false choice. I would have stopped them. Hey, Nathan said, pulling back just enough to look into her eyes. I'd face 100 trials if this is where they lead. The Empress cleared her throat gently. There is still the matter of the formal announcement. The other houses will need to be informed. There will be controversy, as we warned. Let there be controversy, Seraphina said, her voice steady now. Let them argue and debate and complain. Nathan proved himself by every measure that matters. If they can't see his worth, that's their failure, not his. Well spoken, daughter, Vararis said. Then let it be known by the authority of the Emperor of the Draconis Empire, and having passed the trial of proving human, Nathan Brooks is granted permission to formally court Princess Seraphina. Let the historians record it. Let the noble houses debate it. Let the future judge whether we were wise or foolish. He raised his voice, speaking with the full power of his position. But I believe we are witnessing the beginning of something new, not the degradation of our traditions, but their evolution. The universe is changing, has been changing since humans first reached the stars. Perhaps it's time we changed with it. Over the following months, the Emperor's prediction about controversy proved accurate. The noble houses divided sharply on the issue. Some saw Nathan's acceptance as a necessary acknowledgement of the new reality of human-Draconis relations. Others viewed it as an unforgivable breach of tradition. There were formal protests, angry debates in the Imperial Council, and at least 3 challenges to the Emperor's authority that had to be carefully navigated. Through it all, Nathan and Seraphina remained at the center of a storm of their own making, and found themselves growing stronger. For it, Nathan learned more about Dracon's culture, about the intricate dance of politics and tradition that governed imperial life. Serafina learned about human resilience, about the peculiar mixture of stubborn determination and playful irreverence that characterized Nathan's approach to life. They had their first official, formal date 3 weeks after the trial, a carefully orchestrated event that was equal parts diplomatic function and genuine personal time. Nathan wore an actual suit tailored to human proportions but made from draconian materials that shimmered like starlight. Serafina wore jewelry that had been in the imperial family for generations, delicate chains of crystallized flame that wrapped around her neck and arms. They attended a performance of the ancient flame dances, a traditional art form where dracones manipulated fire into complex patterns while flying through three-dimensional space. Nathan, who couldn't fly and would be incinerated by casual contact with the flames, watched from a shielded gallery and found himself moved nearly to tears by the beauty of it. "That's your heritage," he said to Serafina as they watched dancers whose families had performed these same movements for 10,000 years. "That's the tradition I'm becoming part of, not just becoming part of," Serafina replied, taking his hand, changing, adding to, making new. These dances were exactly the same for millennia, but last week the dance master approached me with an idea. They want to create a new form, one that incorporates human music and rhythm with traditional draconian fire manipulation. They're calling it the fusion dance. "Because of us?" Nathan asked. "Because of us," she confirmed. "We're not destroying tradition, Nathan. We're showing that tradition can grow." Not everyone saw it that way. There were protests when they appeared together in public, groups of conservative draconian who held signs written in angular script. Nathan was learning to read. "Keep the bloodlines pure, humans go home, the empire is not for sale." Nathan tried not to let it bother him, but some days were harder than others. After one particularly vocal demonstration outside the palace, he found himself sitting alone in the workshop that had been provided for him, staring at a piece of machinery without really seeing it. "Captain Therne found him there. I thought I might find you here," the Emerald Dragon said. "Bad day. Is it always going to be like this?" Nathan asked. "Am I always going to be the human who corrupted the princess?" The settled down on his hunches, a posture that Nathan had learned indicated serious conversation. "I served the imperial family for 3 centuries, the captain said. "I've watched the empire navigate crises of succession, wars that threatened our existence, plagues that killed billions. I've seen changes that at the time felt like the end of everything we held sacred." And Nathan prompted. "And the empire survived," Therne said, "not by refusing to change, but by changing wisely. There was a time when the idea of allowing non-Rhaenys onto our home worlds was considered unthinkable. There was a time when our empire's borders were considered sacred and absolute, when the idea of cooperating with other species was seen as weakness. Every time there were those who said we were destroying ourselves. Every time they were wrong." He fixed Nathan with those sharp eyes. "You're not corrupting anything. You're part of a natural progression, the next step in a journey that began when we first encountered other intelligent life. Yes, some resist. Yes, it will be uncomfortable. But the alternative is stagnation, and stagnation is death for any civilization." Nathan took a breath. Letting that sink in, "Thank you," he said. Quietly, besides their added standing. To leave, the princess is happier than I've ever seen her. That alone makes you worth any amount of controversy. As seasons changed on Draon's prime, Nathan and Seraphina's relationship deepened. From courtship to genuine partnership. They learned each other's rhythms, their different ways of processing the world. Nathan taught Seraphina about human art and music, introducing her to everything from ancient classical symphonies to modern fusion jazz. She taught him the meditative practices of Draken's philosophy, showing him how to find the still point within himself. Even in chaos, they worked together on projects, combining their different skills. When a manufacturing complex in the outer colonies experienced critical failures, they traveled there together. Nathan analyzed the mechanical failures while Seraphina navigated the political complications of the various factions involved. The result was a solution that satisfied everyone involved and restored production ahead of schedule. Word of their success spread. Other colonies and facilities began requesting their involvement in complex problems, recognizing that the combination of human technical innovation and Draken's diplomatic skill created something more effective than either approach alone. They became, without quite intending to, a team. 1 year after the trial of proving, the Emperor called them both to a private audience. Nathan had learned to read Velaris better now, and he could see the old dragon was troubled. The political situation has evolved, the Emperor said without preamble. Your relationship is no longer the scandal it once was. Oh, there are still opponents, but they've been marginalized by your demonstrated effectiveness. Together, the majority of our citizens have accepted, even embraced the human draconian bond you represent. That's good, isn't it? Seraphina asked. It is. Solara agreed, but it brings new complications. There are now other human draconian relationships forming, inspired by yours. This has created pressure to formalize such bonds under imperial law. We need to establish precedents, traditions, legal frameworks for something that has no historical basis. You want us to be the first, Nathan said, understanding, the first official cross-species union recognized under imperial law. We do, Veraris confirmed. But understand what we're asking. This would be more than a simple marriage ceremony. It would be a state event, a declaration of new policy, a symbolic moment that will be studied by historians for generations. You would be forever the ones who change the empire's fundamental understanding of family and bloodline. Nathan and Seraphina looked at each other, and Nathan saw his own feelings reflected in her eyes, joy mixed with trepidation, excitement with the weight of responsibility. We've already changed the empire, Seraphina said softly, making it official. Just acknowledges the reality. When? Nathan asked. 6 months, the Empress said. That will give us time to prepare appropriately, to navigate the remaining political obstacles, to create ceremonies that honor both human and draconian traditions. Those 6 months passed in a blur of preparation and negotiation. There were endless discussions about the ceremony itself, about which traditions to include and which to adapt. Nathan learned about the Draken's custom of the flame binding, where partners literally linked their fire, their life force, in a bond that was considered unbreakable. Seraphina learned about human wedding vows, the simple exchange of promises that seemed almost absurdly straightforward compared to the elaborate Dracon's rituals. In the end, they created something new, something that borrowed from both culture. The ceremony would take place at dawn, at the moment when the twin moon set and Dracon's prime sun rose, symbolizing transition and new beginnings. There would be the flame binding adapted for Nathan's non-fire nature through the use of specially designed equipment. There would be vows spoken in both human English and Dracon's primary language, and there would be witnesses from across the Empire and beyond, including Nathan was stunned to learn representatives from Earth itself. The day before the ceremony, Nathan's parents arrived from Earth, their first time leaving humanity's home world. Watching them emerge from the shuttle, looking overwhelmed by the alien city around them, Nathan was reminded forcefully of how far he'd come. His mother cried when she saw him, and his father kept looking at the Dracones moving around them with an expression of barely controlled wonder. "You're really doing this," his mother said, holding him tight. "You're really marrying a dragon princess." "I'm really marrying the woman I love," Nathan corrected gently. "Who happens to be a dragon princess." His father laughed at that. "Same boy," he said. "Always had to do things your own way." Meeting Seraphina was an experience Nathan would treasure forever. His mother, all formality forgotten, had immediately started fussing over Seraphina's appearance for the next day's ceremony. His father had engaged the princess in a discussion about engineering principles that revealed he had more in common with royalty than anyone might have expected. By the end of the evening, both his parents were completely charmed, and Nathan felt a weight he hadn't fully acknowledged lift from his shoulders. His family approved. His world and hers had found common ground. The ceremony itself was held in the grand amphitheater, an open-air structure that could accommodate thousands. Every seat was filled, and holographic recording devices captured every moment for broadcast across the Empire and beyond. Nathan stood at the center of an elaborately carved platform, wearing robes that combined human tailoring with draconian materials, and tried not to think about the billions of beings watching. Then Seraphina appeared, and nothing else mattered. She flew in as dawn broke, her scales catching the first light of day and scattering it in 1,000 directions. She'd chosen to remain in her natural form for the ceremony, decision that Nathan understood was itself significant. She was declaring that he loved her as she truly was, not as a smaller, more human, comfortable version. She landed before him, and the crowd fell silent. The ceremony was conducted by the Emperor himself, his voice carrying across the amphitheater with perfect clarity. "We stand at a moment of transformation," he began. "What was once thought impossible has become real. What was once considered incompatible has found harmony. We gather to witness not merely a union of two individuals, but a declaration that love recognizes no boundaries save those we impose upon it." The flame binding came next. Nathan wore specially designed equipment that would allow him to participate in the ritual without being incinerated. It involved a complex arrangement of heat-shielded crystals that could absorb and redirect flame, essentially allowing him to touch fire without being burned. Seraphina generated a flame from deep within herself a manifestation of her life, force that glowed with inner light. Nathan, following the instructions he'd rehearsed 100 times, created his own flame through the crystal apparatus. The two flames touched, merged, and for a moment Nathan felt something profound, a sense of connection that went beyond words or physical sensation. He felt her, felt the enormous presence of her consciousness, her determination, and kindness and fierce protective love, and knew she felt him in return. Then came the vows. Serafina spoke. First in Dracons, her words a rolling cascade of sounds that Nathan had learned to understand. She promised to honor him, to see him truly, to share with him all her days and all her fire. Then Nathan spoke in English, promising to stand beside her through every challenge, to support her in her duties, to love her without reservation for as long as his heart beat. A human tradition, Serafina said, switching to English, and a smile in her voice, requires an exchange of rings. We have adapted this. She held out her claw, and on it rested 2 rings. One was sized for Nathan, made from a metal he didn't recognize that seemed to shift color in the light. The other was much larger, sized for her, made from the same material. These rings are forged from star metal, she explained for the audience, recovered from a meteorite that struck Dracon's prime 10,000 years ago. They contain trace elements from both our sun and yours, a literal joining of our different origins. Nathan took the smaller ring and slid it onto his finger, feeling its perfect weight. Then he took the larger one and, with Serafina's help, placed it on one of her claws where it fit, as though designed for that exact spot. The Emperor raised his voice in declaration. By the ancient authority of the Dracons Empire and by the new traditions we forged this day, I declare Nathan Brooks and Princess Serafina bound in permanent union. Let it be recorded in all the archives. Let it be celebrated across all the worlds. Let it be remembered that today we grew beyond what we were. The crowd erupted in sound, a mixture of traditional Dracon's flame burst that lit the sky, and human-style cheering and applause. Nathan looked up at Serafina, at his wife, and she looked down at him with such love that he felt his eyes burn. With tears, she transformed then, shifting to her smaller form so she could properly embrace him, and they kissed while the crowd roared approval. And the sun rose fully over Dracon's prime, bathing everything in golden light. The celebration that followed lasted 3 days, as was Dracon's tradition. There were formal banquets and informal gatherings, presentations from allied species, and artistic performances from across the empire. Nathan was introduced to so many beings that their names and faces blurred together, but he tried to greet each one with genuine warmth. On the 3rd night, he and Serafina finally had a moment alone, standing on a balcony overlooking the imperial city as it glittered below them. We did it, Serafina said softly. We actually did it. Did you doubt? Nathan asked. Every single day, she admitted. I kept waiting for something to go wrong, for some complication we hadn't foreseen. There will be complications, Nathan said. There always are, but we'll face them together. She leaned against him, and they stood in comfortable silence, watching the city lights and the stars beyond. You know, Serafina said, eventually, when I first saw you in that workshop covered in grease and swearing at a malfunctioning drive core, I thought you were the most charmingly absurd creature I'd ever met. Hi. Praise, Nathan said dryly. She laughed. I mean it, you were so focused, so completely absorbed in solving this problem, you barely noticed me at first. Even though I'm a princess and people usually fall over themselves when I enter a room, you were just annoyed that I was standing in your light. That drive core was being particularly difficult. Nathan defended himself. I know, she said, and I love that you cared more about fixing it properly than about impressing me. It made me want to know you, this human who saw a problem and simply refused to accept that it couldn't be solved. That's basically been my approach to our entire relationship, Nathan pointed out. I know, Serafina said, and it's why we're here, because you refused to accept that we were impossible. They stayed there until the twin moons rose, talking and planning and dreaming about the future. They would build together a future that neither of their species had imagined possible just years before, a future that would be measured in decades rather than centuries, but would burn bright enough to light the way for others. In the years that followed, Nathan and Serafina became more than symbols. They became leaders in their own right, using their unique partnership to bridge gaps between species and solve problems that had seemed intractable. They advocated for greater cooperation between human and draconian research institutions. They mediated in conflicts between colony worlds. They raised children, hybrid beings that should have been impossible but existed because love found a way. There were still opponents, still those who muttered about diluted bloodlines and lost traditions, but they were increasingly drowned out by the voices of those who had been inspired by what Nathan and Serafina represented. Cross-species relationships became more common, accepted, celebrated. The empire evolved as Thern had predicted it would, adapting to a new reality that included rather than excluded. Nathan did eventually participate in the life extension research, though not through the fabricated program the Emperor had invented for the trial. The real research program, inspired in part by his relationship with Serafina, made steady progress. He would never live as long as a Dracones, but the decades they had together stretched into a full century, then beyond. On their 50th anniversary, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, by friends from a dozen different species, by citizens of an empire that had been transformed by their love, Nathan and Serafina renewed their vows. They were older now. Nathan with silver in his hair and lines on his face that spoke of a life fully lived. Serafina with subtle changes to her scales that only he could detect, markers of time even for her long-lived kind. You were right, Emperor Veraris said during the celebration. He was older too, though he would live for millennia more. The day of your trial, when you chose the present over the uncertain future, you were right. You've built something that 1,000 years of careful planning could never have achieved. We just loved each other, Nathan said simply. Everything else followed from that. Sometimes the Emperor replied, that is enough. Sometimes that is everything. As the celebration wounded down and the guests departed, Nathan and Serafina found themselves once again on that same balcony where they'd stood on their wedding night, looking out at the city that had become their home. You know, Nathan said, I've been thinking about what I'd say if I could go back and talk to myself from before I met you. What advice I'd give. What would you say? Serafina asked. Nothing, Nathan Replied, I wouldn't warn myself about the trials or the controversies or the challenges. I wouldn't tell myself that. It would be hard. I'd let myself discover all of it naturally, because knowing the difficulty in advance might have made me hesitate, and hesitating might have meant losing this. He gestured at the city, at the life they'd built, at the family they created. Wise Serafina said, though I might go back and tell myself to be less nervous. When I first asked you to dinner, you were nervous, Nathan asked in mock surprise. The crown princess of the Dracon's empire was nervous about asking out a mechanic, terrified, she admitted. I thought you might say no. Never in a million years, Nathan said. From the moment you walked into my workshop, I was lost. They stood together as the night deepened and the stars came out, one by one, filling the sky with light. Somewhere out there on worlds they'd visited and worlds they'd never see, other beings were looking up at these same stars, and maybe, just maybe, taking courage from the story of a mechanic and a princess who refused to accept that love had limits, and that was the end of the story. If you listened all the way to here, don't forget to leave feedback about what you thought of the story in the comments, whether positive or negative. Your feedback helps us improve. Also, leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one, and I'll leave here on the screen another video that I'm sure you'll like. Big hug and see you in the next